This is Chapter 10, Homework, Concept Question 3.9. We're told that initially an economy is in long-run equilibrium with a real GDP of $4 trillion, which we can see in the graph over here where we have long-run aggregate supply graphed with aggregate demand. So these are just like what we've studied before in the course where we had supply and demand for a particular product, but when we're talking about aggregate supply and aggregate demand, we're talking about the economy as a whole. And in this case, the supply curve for the long run becomes vertical instead of what we're normally used to looking at with our upward sloping supply curve. So that's what we have over here with this graph, and we're told to suppose that the productive capacity of the economy increases by 50%, but that there are no other changes. So when the productive capacity of the economy increases, this is not a change in demand in the economy. This is a change in supply because the suppliers are the producers, right? So when productive capacity increases, that means that the amount that we can produce increases, which means our supply increases. And we're told that it increases by 50%. So that tells us exactly how much it increases. It increases by 50% when it was previously at $4 trillion, our productive capacity, or our long-run supply. We're at $4 trillion. And if we want to increase that by 50%, 50% means half, right? So half of that $4 trillion is $2 trillion. So if we increase 4 by 2, we get $6 trillion. So our long-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift outward to show that it increases by $2 trillion. So I'm going to click our little magnifying glass here so we can look at this up close. And the first part of the question tells us to use a line drawing tool to show the effect on the economy and label our new line. So the effect on the economy here is that our long-run aggregate supply curve shifts outward, rightward, to 6 trillion, because 6 trillion is 4 trillion plus 2 trillion, which is 50% increase from 4 trillion. So I'm going to draw that line here, and I'm going to label that as our new long-run aggregate supply line. And it tells us there are no other changes. So the demand doesn't change, nothing else changes. So the second part of the question wants us to use the point drawing tool to show the new equilibrium price level and output and label that as E2. Now, just like we've always done, we find the equilibrium in an economy by looking at where the supply and demand curves intersect. So here, even though our supply curve is now vertical, it looks a little different than it has in the past, we still have a supply curve and a demand curve. So where those two intersect is our new equilibrium. So I'm going to use the point drawing tool to place a point here at the intersection of my new supply curve and my demand curve. And I'm going to move the label out so that it's not overlapping and so it doesn't freak out my econ lab. And we'll label this E2 as it asks us to. Alright, and then looks good. And if you have any more questions on this, feel free to send an email or stop by office hours.